Hello and welcome back to followers of the Casper journey. Today we're going to be getting into, is Casper inevitable? This video is really going to be a part 2 to my previous video on a look at monetary history. And in that video I made the statement that the adoption of the superior monetary technology is a process that cannot be stopped. It is an inevitable process. And that's quite a bold claim to make. So today we're going to be getting into why I made that claim and why I believe that. And why I believe that if Casper truly is the superior monetary technology, then its adoption is inevitable. So before we get into it today, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe, and also don't forget to check out the Patreon for those who are interested. So a lot of the themes and topics that I'm going to be going into today are inspired by a book called Soft War, which is by Jason Lowery, who is a member of the United States Space Force. Now, in this book, Jason makes the claim that Bitcoin and the adoption of Bitcoin is essentially another form of warfare that humans are fighting, which does sound like quite a strange concept, but we're going to get into some of the explanations for that today. So in the previous video that I talked about, we went through money and monetary history and the evolution of money and analysed why certain monies were used in certain times and why certain monies were phased out over time. And that's very important and big picture stuff to understand. But there's another layer to this and another sort of angle you can approach it from, where you go even deeper than just monetary history and you break everything down into first principles and into physics, really, because physics governs our world. And what I mean by that is energy is everything. To really break down what life is a struggle and a fight and a competition for energy and for resources, but resources really are energy. That's what all of life has been for the past 4 billion years that life has been around on it. And that's the very basic first principles physics viewpoint, that life will do anything and do whatever it can to acquire that energy. Physics is amoral. It doesn't care about any sort of argument or perspective that we have. From a physics point of view, that's what life is about. It is about that acquisition and the control of energy and resources. And the way that we have determined who has ownership of that energy and those resources is through power projection. And what power projection really means is how much power you can exert on your environment, or literally how much energy that you can exert, power being joules per second. And this fundamental principle has been true since the beginning of life on Earth. And so in this fight, the only way that we can really gain an advantage and ensure that we acquire more energy and more resources in our environment, there is really only one way to do that, and that is through technological advancement. Because technological advancement introduces an asymmetry into the environment where one entity or life form can all of a sudden project power more effectively and more efficiently than the competing life forms. Technology allows us to exert more energy in joules per second in our environment. So really that is the first principles view of the world and of life that is going to sort of run through this video. So we're going to again go into history, but this time we're going to go into evolutionary history and the advancement of technology through the ages, both biological technology, which is what we know as evolution, and then after that human technology. So life started around 4 billion years ago in something called the primordial soup, which essentially was just a bunch of proteins floating around in a puddle or a pond somewhere. And these proteins assembled themselves into more and more complex forms until they took on the form of what we would identify as early life, or essentially just having a bunch of genetic information floating around in an assembled order. And this genetic information, because the fundamental purpose of it is to replicate itself and grow, the different forms of information and early life had to compete over the very limited resources and space that were in this primordial soup that existed. And so these primitive biological forms of life, through random mutations, eventually evolved certain characteristics which gave that particular form of life an advantage over the other competing forms of life. So one of the first ever technological biological advancements would have been a cell wall, which essentially just acted as a barrier to the external environment and allowed the primitive life form to keep energy and its matter and resources better contained within its environment and stop any other life forms from taking that energy from it. So it was a defense mechanism. It was a barrier to entry, and it made it more difficult for competing life forms to take the energy from that particular life form. And eventually, because that cell wall gave such an advantage to that life form, all of the other life forms that were not able to produce this cell wall died out and were absorbed, and the energy of those life forms were taken in by the superior life form, which had now evolved a cell wall. And this continued in various different forms. So another advancement would have been something called flagellum, which would have allowed these single-celled organisms to move around their environment and go and seek out other weak life forms that they could then take the energy and resources from. And so when you actually think about this, what are you doing by moving around? You are exerting power and force in your environment, literally joules per second. You are exerting power in order to move around. So that, again, was a very early biological technology that was developed by these single-celled organisms, which, again, gave them an advantage over their competitors. And then one of the next key biological technological advancements was something called sticky proteins. And what sticky proteins did is meant that these single-celled competing organisms were actually stuck together. And so they were, in essence, forced to work together and pool their resources in order to compete with the other single-celled organisms. So this now multi-cell or double-cell organism has an advantage because it is physically bigger and is able to absorb and take the energy from these other single-celled organisms. And so these are biological evolutions that gave some life forms the ability to better project power, literally in joules per second, over the other life forms and violently take their resources. And of course, this was all just sort of a random process that happened. These life forms have no idea what's going on. They are basically just cells organized into various forms that give an advantage over other cells. And so that is why 90% of all life on Earth by mass is multicellular, because being multicellular gives a huge advantage over being single cellular. And so it's important to consider evolution as essentially a biological technology, and that biological technology gives you an advantage in your environment and allows you to outcompete and take the resources of the inferior biological technologies that are around you, and also to better protect your own resources. And so this process continued to essentially iterate and occur over and over and over again, with these small biological technologies being developed, which gained some sort of advantage over the other technologies, until more and more complex life forms emerged, such as mammals. And so one of the best examples of a biological technology is the eye. It's very clear how an eye gives you a serious advantage over an organism without an eye. It enables you to detect and to respond to your environment more effectively in both defense, so protecting your resources, and also offense, so taking the resources of another animal, literally the energy that another animal has collected in its life. And very, very few advanced life forms do not have some form of eye. And there's a reason for that, because the eye is a superior biological technology. Those that lack the capability to see generally have not been able to project power as effectively in their environment. And so they will have their energy and their resources taken by another organism that is more able to project power in their environment. And so what we see around us is what works, and it is the superior technology that survives that is all around us. So going down further down the evolutionary tree, we come to the great apes. And one of the most important technologies that great apes harnessed and utilized was fire. And the advantage that fire gave essentially was that it allowed the pre-digestion of food, which meant that more of the energy could go from the food into brain power instead of expending more of that energy to digest the food. So again, that technology was literally energy. It was taking the energy from a tree and putting it into food, and then from the food into the brain. That allowed humans to develop larger and larger brains. And fire is an interesting one because arguably it is one of the first ever technologies that was not a biological technology. It was actually a human-made technology, in the sense that humans harnessed the fire that was around them and discovered how to control and utilize this fire for their own good. And so the development of the complex brain, which again is a biological technology, allowed humans to develop abstract thinking and the ability to share ideas. And this led to huge levels of cooperation and also the creation of shared abstractions. And it also gave humans the ability to create non-biological technologies. But fundamentally, the process that's going on is still the exact same process that was happening in that primordial soup. It is basically just nature testing out what is working, what methods are more able to project power and exert energy on their environment, and those ideas are the ideas that get selected and survive. And the worse ideas that are not able to project power, they essentially die out. And so from these more developed brains that humans had acquired, this led to the formation of societies, and it allowed humans to settle in one place and work together with a higher and higher number of humans, again because of those shared abstractions and sort of shared ideas that they can now utilize. And examples of these shared abstractions are something like religion or laws or countries, essentially are shared abstractions, and it allows humans to collect together and not fight each other and work towards a common goal. And just as those multicellular organisms were able to better project power than the single-celled organisms, the humans that were able to have shared abstractions and create societies with each other were able to better project power than the humans who were not able to have these shared abstractions and couldn't work it together as effectively. And that is actually the reason that Homo sapiens are the only surviving great ape on the planet, because we developed this ability much better than Neanderthals did. And so with this, and with the formation of societies and the development of agriculture, this essentially led to a huge concentration of energy and wealth and resources in one place. And this essentially gives rise to something called the honeypot problem. And what the honeypot problem is that when you have that abundance of energy and resources and wealth in that area, it is basically guaranteed that someone will want to take that energy and that wealth from you. In the exact same way that happened in the primordial soup, if a organism was not able to develop a cell wall and it had its resources and energy just floating around, then another organism would be guaranteed and incentivized to come along and take the resources of that single-celled organism that was not able to protect itself efficiently. And the exact same thing happened with humans. So the first ever recorded conqueror or emperor is someone called Sargon of Akkad, who saw all these humans developing societies and creating these rich areas of agriculture and farmland, which was undefended and unprotected. And Sargon came along and forcibly took and acquired the resources of the people who'd been developing this farmland. And you can sort of apply any sort of morals or viewpoint you want to this, but Sargon is doing the exact same thing that was occurring in that primordial soup. He is acting in the exact same way. And from him acting like that, he was able to survive better and be successful in his environment. And so the only real solution to the honeypot problem is to impose a severe physically prohibitive cost on your would-be attacker. So, in other words, make the cost to benefit ratio of taking your energy unprofitable. So now there's a huge amount of energy there to be acquired, but if you have to then expend a huge amount of energy to take it, then it becomes unprofitable or not a good idea to take the energy, because it's now a zero or negative sum equation. Whereas if you don't impose that physically prohibitive cost, then essentially it's just free energy and free resources. If you only have to expend a very small amount of resources to take that energy from that undefended property, then historically and in terms of physics, that's a very smart thing to do. And so this story of non-biological evolution, or in other words, technological advancement, has continued and still continues to this day. So some examples of this is the fall of Constantinople. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had these huge cannons manufactured for him, which were sort of the first of their kind and never seen before. So it was a huge technological advancement for the time. And these cannons gave him the ability to project power and exert a huge amount of energy on Constantinople, despite the fact that they had these huge walls protecting it. And because Emperor Constantine at that time refused to look at this new technology and said that it was too expensive, and that he thought that, as they had done in the past, the walls of Constantinople would protect them, he failed to adopt the superior technology and therefore lost his empire and lost his life in the end. And there was someone called Billy Mitchell, who was in the United States Air Force, and he foresaw that after World War I, aircrafts and air power would be a huge factor in winning wars in the future. And that was the method of power projection that was the most efficient. And he pushed for this in the United States military, but he was laughed at by his superiors, and instead military command focused on building a huge fleet and projecting sea power instead of air power. And he was actually court-martialed for this insubordination and pushing constantly against his superiors to have the United States Air Force be implemented and created. And what was the result of America not having a particularly good air force at that time? The result was that they had their entire fleet destroyed in the Pacific in the attack on Pearl Harbor. And luckily, America was able to pivot pretty quickly into creating air power after that. But it goes to show that anyone can fall victim to not adopting the superior technology and not adopting the method that allows you to project power and project energy in the most efficient way possible. And no one is safe from this. You don't have the ability to opt out of this. That power projection and that struggle over resources and energy is the base layer of life. It is the consensus mechanism of nature. It is governed by physics, and we do not have the ability to opt out of it. You can come up with all these sort of laws and religions and abstract forms of power, basically, but if someone comes at you with a superior technology and uses that technology on you to project more power than you can, then you will lose that battle, and there's nothing you can do about it. So essentially, your only option is to adopt the superior technology and adopt the method that allows you to project power in the most efficient way possible and project the most power in your environment. So it really is adapt or die. You either adopt the superior technology or you lose. And that is in terms of biological technology. And biological technology is purely luck and purely random. If you were blessed with the favourable genetic traits and the genetic traits that gave you the best ability to project power, then you were the lucky one. And what we see around us today are all the organisms and biological technologies that have been able to project that power more efficiently than any of their competitors. And the exact same thing is true with technology. The technologies that we see today are non-biological evolution, and they are the methods that have allowed humans in the past to project power in the best and most efficient way possible. And everyone who stayed using the inferior technologies either died or they wised up really quickly and did adopt the superior technology. So what works survives. And so I use the term superior monetary technology quite a lot because money is, and it always has been, a technology. And as technology has advanced and become more and more complex, so has money. Originally we used beads and shells, and then as mining and smelting techniques got better, we used monetary metals, specifically gold. And then with the dawn of the digital age, we have seen the emergence of cryptocurrencies. And so really, economics is just an extension of this game in the past that we've talked about. It is an extension of this power projection protocol that has governed all of life. Economics is essentially non-violent warfare, and that is because the goal of economics is essentially the same as the goal of warfare. It is to increase your wealth and the amount of energy and power in the environment that you control. And so there are essentially two ways to become wealthy. You can either grow the overall pie and the overall amount of energy in the environment, and that is essentially warfare against nature. So for example, if you cut down a huge amount of trees and those trees go into the economy to create goods and services, then you have increased the overall slice of the pie. But what you have done is you have taken the energy from nature, and you have taken the energy from that living organism of the tree, and you have more efficiently projected power than the tree has. Or what you can do is you can increase your slice of the pie without growing the pie at all. And then what you're effectively doing there is you're better projecting power in one way or another against your fellow humans and making yourself richer, but at their expense. And because that essentially is a zero-sum game. If the amount of energy and resources in the environment aren't growing, then the only way for you to get richer is via everyone else getting poorer. And money can really be thought of as an extension of the energy game, because money effectively is a store of energy. So money's not literally a store of energy in the sense that oil has energy trapped in it or wood has energy trapped in it. But as a shared human abstraction, like we talked about before in the prefrontal cortex of humans, money is effectively a store of energy. And to really think about this, let's say that you have $1 million and you're lying in bed all day, but you decide you want a house to be built. So what you can do is you can pay that $1 million to other humans to go and collect the resources for that house, to bring those resources to the location you want it to be, and then to assemble those resources into the structure of a house. So you are lying in your bed, not doing anything, but from having this money, you're actually exerting physical power and physical watts on the environment and causing a change in your environment, even though you're not doing anything. You're literally just lying in bed. So in that sense, there is energy stored in the money. Again, not literally, but because of this human abstraction, there is economic energy stored within the money. And so I hope from this that you understand why proof of work is so important over proof of stake. Because proof of work is an extension of that power projection game. You are securing your energy and your resources, which is either the Bitcoin or Casper protocol, with physical energy and physical power. And again, there's no physical energy stored in Bitcoin or Casper, but because of the shared human abstraction, Bitcoin and Casper both have the ability to exert physical energy onto the world. And so it's the same as the honeypot problem, where both Bitcoin and Casper, or really any form of money, is a huge, dense resource of energy that other people are going to want to take from you. And bearing in mind that you cannot unsubscribe from this power projection game, no matter how much you want to, no matter all the sort of shared abstractions that we create as humans. So the only way to adequately defend your property and your energy is using power projection or using physical energy to secure your property. And that is why proof of work is the only consensus mechanism that will survive the long term, because it aligns with this power projection game that aligns with the laws of physics. And so to really highlight what proof of stake is, and the only way I will ever buy a proof of stake coin is if you take all of your liquid net worth, put it in the back of a pickup truck in cash, and drive it into the centre of a busy city like London or New York. Because remember, that money is your money, and it is actually illegal for anyone else to take it. And because we all have stake in the laws and our part in society, and we all know that it is illegal and, in theory, immoral to take that money, therefore, no one should take it, right? Because we all have stake in the society. So if you do that, if you take all of your money and drive it into a busy city on the back of a pickup truck, then I will buy your proof of stake coin. But of course, you're not going to do that, because you know for certain that that money is going to be gone in a very short amount of time, because that is essentially the same as the honeypot problem. That is a huge amount of economic density and energy stored within that money on the back of the pickup truck. And the cost to benefit ratio of taking that money is basically zero. You know, people can just freely reach in, grab it, and then leg it, and there's going to be basically no consequence. That's what a proof of stake system is. It's saying that we can override the laws of physics and the power projection game with some shared abstraction that we create. But history shows us time and time again that that game cannot be unsubscribed from, and that we have to play that game, whether we like it or not. And so it's relatively obvious why something like the automatic assault rifle has been adopted over the bow and arrow, because the assault rifle allows you to exert power and project power in a more efficient way than the bow does. And it's relatively obvious why something like gold won out over something like the ray stones. Again, because gold had a harder proof of work protocol than the ray stones. It was physically harder and physically required more joules and more energy to produce the gold than it did the ray stones. And again, it should be relatively obvious why it is advantageous and why Bitcoin is the superior technology to the dollar or any sort of fiat currency. Again, because the proof of work and the amount of energy that it requires to create that Bitcoin is of course much higher than the energy it takes to create the fiat money, which is zero. But it's a little bit less obvious why Casper gives an advantage over Bitcoin in terms of power projection and physical energy. But in my opinion, it does. And we're going to get into that now. So this is a graph of the emergence of a money and the phases that it goes through before it is a full global money. So it sort of starts out as a digital collectible and then eventually emerges as a store of value, which I believe that is the position we're in now for both Bitcoin and Casper. And then it becomes a reliable store of value, which is probably closer to where we are with Bitcoin. And then after it becomes a reliable store of value, it then starts becoming a widespread medium of exchange and eventually becoming a widespread unit of account. And so because we are so early in the adoption phase of Bitcoin and it is still fundamentally only being used as a store of value, as Bitcoin continues to grow, the weakness of it as a medium of exchange will start to become more and more apparent, and the issues that that will bring will start to become more and more apparent. And so I predict this will start happening at around 40 to 50 trillion market cap. So, I think Bitcoin still has a huge amount to grow before these issues start to really become apparent and really start to create real actual frictions in the world and real problems. And so because of these frictions that will be created from Bitcoin being a very bad medium of exchange, which will again become more and more apparent as its market cap grows, these frictions will be attempted to be solved via centralization, as they have always been throughout history. Because a centralized system is fundamentally a more efficient and more powerful system. Living in a dictatorship, they are able to make decisions and make progress much faster than living in a democracy. But then the problem with that is that the person in power and the person at the head of that centralization is then able to abuse the system and abuse the citizens within the system because of the power that that centralization brings. So while decentralization is sort of slow and inefficient, but arguably fairer, centralization is faster and much more efficient, but can be exploited to be much less fair than decentralization. And so I think likely what we will see, because of the frictions that will come from Bitcoin, will be more and more centralization within the Bitcoin network. And I think what will emerge from that is initially, via the Lightning Network, you will have Bitcoin private banks, which act as custodians of the collateral in order to speed up transactions and speed up efficiencies in the exact same way that happened with gold. And then eventually what will happen, because a centralized system always trends towards more centralization, because that again continues to increase efficiency, I think eventually what you will have is essentially a Bitcoin central bank, where because most of the collateralized Bitcoin is owned by these private banks, aka the Lightning channels, a government will be able to come in and step in and order all of these private banks to hand over the collateral to a centralized Bitcoin bank. And they will, of course, argue that this increases efficiency and they're doing it for the good of the people. But again, that will be a centralized system. As we know from a centralized system, that will give people within the centralized system a huge amount of power over the people that have to use that centralized system, in the exact same way central banking has done now. And so to really understand the power that the centralization has given governments and central banks, you have to look at the productive man hours stolen. So governments and central banks have been conducting essentially a multi-century arbitrage where they are able to issue an extremely portable currency because of the frictions of the actual money, which is gold, but they control the supply of this currency. And because they then control the supply of this currency and can counterfeit this currency, they can essentially steal the productive energy and power that is stored within that money, like we talked about. Even though there's not actual physical energy stored within the money, there is abstract energy and abstract power within that money. And so them having the ability to print more of it, they can essentially take energy and take power from you, in the exact same mechanism that in that primordial soup, a multicellular organism was able to take the resources and energy of the single-celled organism. The centralized structures are able to take the energy and resources and productivity of those who have to use the centralized system. So if we look at the M2 money supply and cumulative working hours stolen, so stealing an average of 7.6% working hours per year, which is the average rate of M2 or money supply growth since 1981, bureaucrats at the Fed have managed to scalp nearly 1 trillion hours off the backs of hard-working people. And that is the equivalent of enslaving 11.7 million people for 40 years straight. In terms of absolute human time they have stolen per year, fiat currency is the largest pyramid scheme and institution of slavery in human history. And that's a quote by Robert Breedlove. So obviously the mechanism is not the exact same as the sort of slavery of the 16 and 1700s, but the end result is the same. It is the theft of the energy and time and resources that human is working for. But the thing with Casper is that Casper is immune to this decentralization. Because it doesn't have the scalability issue, there will be no drive or no need to go towards that move to centralization, and therefore it will not allow anyone to take power within that system. And again, because no one is able to take power and no one is able to control Casper, you are able to better maintain and keep your energy than if you use fiat, and likely eventually if you use Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will have to be centralized to become usable as a currency. And so just like those single-celled organisms in the primordial soup who built a wall around them to protect their energy and protect their resources, that's still the game that we are playing, that power projection game of protecting your own resources and potentially taking other people's resources. And because Casper is the best tool and the best technology that allows humans to be able to do that, I see the adoption of Casper as inevitable, in the same way that evolution is inevitable and the adoption of these superior biological technologies was inevitable. You know, once the eye had been evolved, it was inevitable that every single complex organism would develop an eye in response or die out. And once efficient weapons such as the assault rifle have been invented, it is inevitable that every single standing army uses that assault rifle, because the choice is either use it or die out and lose the battle. I believe the same is true for the superior monetary technology. If you do not adopt the superior monetary technology, in one way or another, you will have your resources stolen and you will lose the power projection game. And therefore, those who adopt the superior monetary technology will win and will effectively survive throughout the ages. And this is why I am hyper bullish on Casper, because I see it as the next iteration of human evolution. It is the superior technology, the non-biological technology that has been developed and released to us, which best allows us to project power and also to protect our resources and energy in the environment. And that is why I am essentially dedicating my entire channel and my entire X profile to Casper, because I believe it is so important. And it's not just another cryptocurrency, it is the next step of human evolution, of non-biological evolution, and the next iteration. If you do not adopt it, in one way or another, you will lose, and you will lose your energy and resources. But if you do adopt it, then just like throughout history, you will win because you have adopted the superior technology. So that is what I wanted to get into today, guys. So thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and to check out the Patreon if you are interested. So until next time, cheers guys.